Considering the current geopolitical climate with Russia invading Ukraine and in certain parts trying to do a bit of a genocide, this is perhaps not the best game to cover now, which is why Raul suggested that I cover this game now. So here's Red Alert 3, a game that I covered back when it was released. And I can't say that I hated it. I was let down by parts of it. But oh boy, did people hate it. They hated it in ways I didn't know you could hate games in. Like, the tanks are too big, they take up too much of the screen, which, okay, granted, maybe now, when we have gigantic ass resolutions on our monitors, could be a thing, but back then we were all on 800 by 600, so it's not like we had much choice in the matter. But before we get to the core of why this game had its issues, we must travel back in time to the year 2008. February 2008, even before Russia invaded Georgia, when the game was revealed with a trailer that set the stage for a new conflict. One that did not involve simply the same old forces that we used to know. Okay, yeah, they were still there, the Allies and the Soviets. But now there was a new threat on the horizon, the Empire of the Rising Sun. Japan stepped onto the battlefield with giant mecha robots and anime. To discuss the game on its own merit is difficult because this was a game released by Electronic Arts back when we hated Electronic Arts. We kind of always hate Electronic Arts. That's what Electronic Arts is for, but back then it really tried its best to have no reason for people to like Electronic Arts. Keep in mind that what I'm about to say is from a different time when you could install a game on any system you wanted as many times as you wanted to and play it like that. It wasn't tied to just one single account that could only be active on one single PC at one single time. It was a different time when people still, were against the idea of DRM being shoved down your throats at every corner and asking for more, please daddy. When not everything was a live service, when things like Electronic Arts shipping the game with incomplete CD keys pissed people off, or saying that, hey, yeah, you can install this game on 3 machines and then you're screwed, okay, maybe contact us, and if you're lucky, we'll reset that counter for you. Okay, granted, Electronic Arts actually has, in the past couple of years, has great customer support service, and I mean it, they have really good customer support service. They offered game refunds before Steam did. But back then, it wasn't really all that much, to the point where people that I wouldn't say criticized or being mean about Electronic Arts in general and their games on the official support forums, they would sometimes, if things got heated, they would get their accounts, their forum accounts banned, and since that was tied to their Electronic Arts master account, some games would not be playable anymore. This would be the equivalent of getting your Steam discussion forum account banned, leading to your entire game library being locked. Anywho, getting to the game itself. It was developed by Electronic Arts Los Angeles, which was a portion of the company that used to make some actually good games back in the day. The long forgotten day. They made Command & Conquer 3. They made the Battle of Middle-earth games. They made the mistake of being rebranded as Danger Close, and be transformed into the monstrosity that birthed Tiberian Twilight and the last two Medal of Honor games, which no one should have played, but some of us were forced to, and we are forever bitter about it and angry. So very angry. In this game, this Red Alert 3 had the difficult task of existing in a truly post-StarCraft world. Okay, Red Alert 2 also was in a post-StarCraft world, but this, oh boy, man, this was gonna be rough. Virtually every other RTS had its own gimmick in order to differentiate itself from StarCraft. The very games that this studio made before had the gimmick of being Lord of the Rings strategy games. Hell, StarCraft 2 had been announced and was only 2 years away. So what they did was make it work on consoles. Now that's not actually a bad thing. Command & Conquer tried consoles before, StarCraft tried consoles before, didn't work, but now they actually managed to do it. Mostly because they've been doing it since Battle of Middle-earth 2. There was a market there. At least Microsoft hoped there was a market there with Halo Wars, and yeah, there kinda was. Only this wasn't just for the Xbox crowd, this was for the PlayStation as well. Or it would be, about a year after release. The PlayStation 3 had, porting games to it had issues. But it was more than just a console port, it was a console attitude in one very specific area. Co-op was a gigantic thing on consoles. Maybe it still is. Who knows? Back then, it was sort of taken for granted that any kind of game that was on a console would have a co-op mode, so that you can play with your friends, not just against them or against some randos on the internet. But that brought up an interesting dilemma. How do you do that? You can't just have a second player drop into your match, into your campaign, and then vanish at the drop of a hat. No, that would kind of mess with things too much. They had to craft a single player mode that effectively was completely designed with co-op in mind. You were, in most missions, never alone. You always had a second commander on the field with their own base, their own units, sometimes their own objectives. Didn't matter if it was controlling their own vast army or controlling a single bear. Everybody had a different presence. But to make that work in single player, not just in co-op, meant that those units, those AI entities had to be controlled by somebody. Not just a faceless AI system, but somebody that you could order around, get answers from, yell at. And wouldn't you know, the Command & Conquer series had such a concept in Command & Conquer Generals, where you had different AI generals that you could fight against, each with their own speciality. So they took that idea, they put faces on them, they gave them lines, they gave them personality, and that's how they made the single player. And it worked. It is the part of the game that I actually managed to pull off for the most part without any issues. It sometimes gets to the point where you even forget that there's an AI there with you, because it does its job. And the missions, they can be quite varied. Sometimes you're just, building your base and going off to fight the enemy, or holding your ground against the enemy, or you're with a conscript and a bear trying to infiltrate some fortress. And the conscript keeps talking to the bear. And there's that one mission where you're piloting a gigantic three-headed monstrosity that is just devastating the entire map. And because it's a Command & Conquer game, because it's a Red Alert game, there's cinematics. And they're all made with flesh and blood actors. Some of them really good actors. J.K. Simmons is in this. Peter Stormare, Jonathan Pryce, George Takei. Even Tim Curry is in this. And they are all playing ridiculous, over-the-top, scene-chewing, you could say, sometimes deranged characters. And that works well because some of the other characters are played by models, and I wouldn't say they do a bad job. I mean, this is the worst version of Tanya we've ever gotten. And not just because she's played by a deranged wacko. The story is what you would expect for a sequel of Red Alert 2. This time the Soviets, when they were close to being defeated, used their own prototype time machine to go back in time and erase Einstein before he helped the Allies get an advantage in technology. It harkens back to the intro of Red Alert 1. So now you have a reality where there is no Hitler and there is no Einstein, which leads to the Soviets having superiority in Europe, but the Empire of the Rising Sun also has superiority in its neck of the woods and now wants to throttle the other necks of the other woods. It's also a world without nuclear weapons, which has a deep effect in gameplay. There is no nukes anymore. You can't build a nuke silo and, bomb your enemies, which means that super weapons are they kind of suck. They kind of all look the same. I'll get to that in a bit. Story is fine. It's goofy, it's campy, it's silly. The guy who played Shang Tsung in the Mortal Kombat Conquest TV series, I swear, is half a second away from laughing every time he says a line. And it's just fine. But then there's the other bits of the game. Red Alert 3 is as much of a sequel to Red Alert 2 as it is to Generals, and honestly I did not enjoy Generals' approach to the economy, and this takes it one step further and makes it even worse. The whole allure of the Command & Conquer series, Red Alert especially, was that it harkened back to the origins of the RTS. And the origins of the RTS as we know today is in Dune 2, where resources were gathered by taking your harvester and plopping it on a field and hoping it doesn't get killed while it gathers, suctions up, vacuums up resources, brings them back and does this constantly. Territory control over resources was quite important. You couldn't just plop an expo next to a small field of resources. No, you had to extend control over a bigger area and stop enemy harvesters from coming in and protect your own harvesters. And at some point you'd just say, whatever, just collect as many resources as you want. I'm gonna build 20 Apocalypse tanks and 12 Kirovs and level everything anyway in a couple of minutes. It was its own style of economy. One that, how should I put this? Because this was a post-StarCraft world, everybody was trying to be a new esport, to be the new StarCraft. And it sucked. Because you had people who thought in terms of esports balancing, making game mechanic decisions, making gameplay decisions. And that's a bad thing, because if you want a good esport, just have a game that isn't fun. And it'll be a massive esport. That's what esports does. It sucks the fun out of everything. Everything has to be balanced and everything has to be tailor-made for people who count their APMs in megahertz. I just want to postface my last couple of words by saying that at that moment in time we were having major issues with the Romanian professional StarCraft community coming into our forums and being dickheads because we dared to not praise StarCraft enough as being the greatest game of all time. My god, those people are assholes. And most of them were 12. Anywho, the economy of the game was basically screwed. It was no fun. You just plopped your resource gatherer 2 centimeters away from your mine. It was kind of stupid to even have a distinction between the two. At least they could have done it like Warcraft did, where you could just take over a mine. At least go full hog, not this half-baked idea that removes all the fun from having your harvesters go out and do stuff, but adds all the so very pleasant annoyances of harassing them when they're 2 centimeters away from their goal constantly. That is one of the things that I believe most people agree on. That changing the way the economy works, the way that resources are gathered, absolutely ruined it as a Red Alert game, as feeling like a Red Alert game. Yeah, you're still getting resources, but it doesn't feel like you're doing it in a Red Alert game. That is the main and very important distinction. Theming. is important. And the developers understood this in a way because having Japan as a faction means that you have to have ships. A lot of ships in the game, a lot of seafaring vessels, because traditionally that is how Japan was viewed, as a small island nation that projects force using fleets of ships. Granted, that's true for most seafaring nations, but Japan specifically in this case. And you could not really do that if the game was the same as all the other Red Alerts, where yes, there were units at sea, but they were limited. I mean, you couldn't go outside of the sea with them. Yeah, they could have long-range cannons or something, but they would still be quite limited. So they removed the limitation for most buildings and units. A large proportion of your structures, of your army, was amphibious. You could build things on water for the first time in the series. You couldn't build barracks in some cases because not all of your soldiers could swim, but your bears, your dogs, your engineers, your ninjas, your spies, they could. You could build Tesla boats which could go onto land by deploying spider legs. Yes, spider leg equipped Tesla boats. This was a fever dream in some places with the way the units looked. The Soviets had other units that could not go onto water, but they could jump around and get down. The Apocalypse tank, however, could not go onto water. It is one of the units that both got nerfed and buffed from its previous iterations. It was big, but I kinda felt it died a bit too easily in some situations, what with it no longer having an anti-air system equipped onto it. However, it sort of compensated that with the fact that now it had an alternate fire mode, which let it to throw a tractor beam onto buildings or other tanks, and it ate them. Just look at this massive thing eating a tank. The whole amphibious thing, trifibious actually, because some units were either underwater or flying. Actually, no, it'd still be amphibious because they couldn't go on land. Anyway, this whole thing changed fundamentally how the game functioned compared to the rest of the series. Because now, an island didn't mean that you were safe if you just shot down some transports. No, now an island meant that you could be screwed 6 ways from Sunday if you didn't have proper defenses at every point. It made turtling a bit more challenging is what I'm saying. And as I mentioned a couple of seconds ago, the Apocalypse tank had a secondary fire mode. Everything had a secondary fire mode. And this, I think, is where the game really went a bit too far. Everything had a gimmick. Everything, every unit had a gimmick. It was neat that the GI in Red Alert 2 could deploy itself. The conscript didn't do that, but the conscript was cheap and you could churn them out in droves. The conscript didn't need its own special ability. Now it had one, it could throw Molotovs. Every unit had its own thing. And it made for a micromanagement nightmare, to be honest, because only the unit selected in your group would have its secondary attack mode or special power activatable. So you had to cycle through them to get to the one you wanted, which in the heat of battle didn't really work out that well, to be honest. I mean, not that some of these were bad ideas. Mirage tanks could now camouflage everybody but themselves. The replacement of the Prism tank, the Athena cannon, could deploy a shield, or direct an ion cannon from orbit to laser somebody's face off. Alright, so it wasn't an ion cannon, but it was something similar. In a way, this meant that they could get away with having fewer units all around, I mean. There weren't any more special units based on nations because there weren't any nations anymore. You didn't have the snipers, the demo trucks, the terrorists, the desolators, where you would get the desolators in a later expansion, a standalone expansion, which was the first video review that I actually edited myself. I used to just write them, but that's when I actually did the editing. The expansion itself was a nice addition. Ric Flair was in it, Malcolm McDowell, and Holly Valance for some reason. She was big back then, like Emmanuel Vaugier, they were everywhere. But back to the core Red Alert 3 game. They could get away with having fewer units because all your units could double as something else, or at least something slightly different. But again, that did make things feel a bit more fiddly. And some units, they really didn't need secondary fire mode. Did you really need to make the Kirovs faster? Oh, they take damage, yeah. They can bomb the crap out of you anyway. You made them faster? Something that could have actually benefited from having a proper afterburner, go faster mode would have been the anti-air and only anti-air MiG interceptors that the Russians have. Because they're so slow, they can barely catch up to the transport helicopters of the same faction. Said transport helicopters being so spammable by the AI especially, that what usually happens is that the Russian air specialist commander wipes the map out with them. They're not just transports, they have guns, and they don't have to land like the siege helicopter in Yuri's Revenge. And the interceptors even have limited ammo, so they can't protect an area long term. They have to go back or they explode. I don't think they actually thought the balancing thing out completely, and that really shows with the super weapons. There's two categories of super weapons in Red Alert 3. There's the ones you build, your iron curtains, your, I was gonna say weather machine, but there's nothing that interesting. You've got the stuff that blows something up, and they all look the same and work exactly the same, and the stuff that gives you a utility. And then there's the stuff you don't build, because depending on how much stuff you kill and how heated the action is, you get points that you get to distribute in a small, let's call it a skill tree. Some of them will give you bonuses to certain types of units, but most of them are weapons of mass destruction. Ones that can't be disabled by destroying their building because they don't have a building. They're tied to the command center, to any command center. And there's no countdown for them. You just wake up one day with a big bomb ticking down in the middle of your base. You've got a couple of seconds to either blow it up or pack everything up and run away because it'll explode and kill everything. My favorite of these are the ones that USSR has. One of them is a big magnet that sucks up anything it passes by up into the air, high up into the air, and the other one is dropping whatever you lifted up into the air alongside a couple of satellites onto whoever is down there. The last thing that falls, if you have the complete upgrade, is the Mir space station, one of them I guess, and that tends to do quite a lot of damage. But it can be so annoying, because there is no, hey, watch out, your units that you just parked in your base and that you're getting ready to use to invade a nearby AI player, they just got sucked up completely by a space magnet. Enemy AI units will always dodge them because that's what the enemy AI does. It actively controls every unit simultaneously. The AI of your units, not that bright. Not that bright at pathfinding. You can set them in aggressive mode and maybe, hopefully, they'll attack something that's nearby, but mostly they're predicated on you being really good at microing and jumping all over the place on the map. And speaking of maps, it shipped with a bunch of them, thankfully. And there is a world builder out there that you can use to make your own skirmish and multiplayer maps. But, how shall I put this? This is the worst skirmish mode that the series has ever had. You have basically no options when going to skirmish. Yeah, you can set where you start on the map and where everybody starts, but other than that, you set your opponents and your starting resources, and if crates appear, crates, yeah. They went the route of Diablo 2 with making, the random crates you find about as engaging as the shrines in Diablo 2, as compared to the shrines in Diablo 1. There's no mystery anymore, you know exactly what a crate is. Multiple crates can be on the map at the same time. It's kind of actually difficult to get them because some units don't collide with them properly. The bear, for example, I think it's using the collision mesh for a dog, which is a lot smaller. but you can't set anything else. You can't set the time of day, for example. There is no time of day setting in the game at all. In Skirmish and multiplayer, you'll always be stuck with the same lighting on the same tool, let's call them tile sets. It's either summer or winter. There's not really much else on the default maps. And that gets old, oh, so quickly. But most of all, most importantly, the thing that really, and I mean really, makes Skirmish suck hard in Red Alert 3 is there's no option to disable super weapons. And when you've got up to 4 super weapons per faction, actually 5 in some cases, per faction, per opponent in the late game, it just becomes nonsense. I mean, not as nonsense as the flag cannons. You remember the flag cannons, right, from Red Alert 2? They're kind of useful anti-air defense systems. They can't shoot down missiles anymore. Complete nonsense. Oh yeah, and there's no random map generation anymore, which yeah, kind of makes sense. In 3D it kind of works badly. I mean, Heroes 7 came out almost a decade later, and it still takes like half an hour to make a map. What I'm getting at is that outside of the campaign, Red Alert 3 kind of stinks at single player. But it's okay if there's multiplayer, which you better download the community server thing, because it was based on GameSpy, so it didn't work after GameSpy got the axe. Now, some of these issues were fixed in the standalone expansion. I mean, not the Skirmish being less crap, but by compensating for it through adding a different challenge mode, which is interesting and lets you play as any faction you want with any units you collect along the way, which is again something similar to what Generals did. The expansion actually tried to have a more action-focused mini-campaign where you just control the equivalent of Yuri, which is Yuriko, in a Diablo-like top-down action RPG, I guess? Hack and slash, whatever you want to call it. That expansion did add a bunch of other units and fix really most of the issues that plagued the first game, but hey, at least they had a different game now with more stuff in it. They could have just made a single game, but that's not how things work. All in all, Red Alert 3 was kind of disappointing. I mean, it did have its good features. The music, for example, even though Frank Lepaki only contributed with a couple of songs, the music made by James Hannigan and Timothy Michael Wynn is just phenomenal. The Soviet March was just the bomb, and the Imperial melody thing, especially the one that's in the expansion, that's just superb. It sounds as fantastic as any Command & Conquer game should sound, and the graphics back when it was released, they looked amazing. The water looked wet, it looked like it had depth. They put a lot of care into it since it's gonna be a big part of the game, and yeah, graphically it looks great, but it just looks great. There's no interaction anymore at the level that we used to have with the world. Sure, you can blow up buildings, but you can't kidnap cows anymore. You have a unit called the Bullfrog, which can launch your units and have them paradrop over a river, for example, but you can't fill it with cows equipped with TNT. That option isn't there. You can't even create irradiated ground anymore unless you have one specific Soviet ability, or in the expansion, a desolator. There's no irradiation anymore when you blow up a reactor. That whole zone of denial gameplay, that's gone. The world just feels dead, abandoned, sparse, small, which, yeah, because of the graphics, they would kind of have to be. And this is where Red Alert ended. The Command & Conquer series turned into whatever Tiberian Twilight was, and you can kind of see traces of what it was going to be in the Yuriko mini-campaign of the expansion as a hack-and-slash MOBA-ish affair, because everything had to be a MOBA, everything had to chase League of Legends now, since it was the next big thing. The thing that took Dota and made it bigger. Hey, by the way, wanna know something funny about mods and stuff? Red Alert 2 had a tower defense focused map and Yuri's Revenge a year before Warcraft 3 came out. Not saying that's where the idea came from, but it was a maze tower defense map before we even knew what that was. We would briefly get some hope for Command and Conquer through the Generals 2 teaser that turned into Generals in General teaser and then got cancelled a while ago. It seems like Command and Conquer's and Red Alert's glory is in its past, as Electronic Arts itself released the remastered versions of the first 2 games and hopefully will one day do the same with the next 2. As for 3, well, it's on Steam, it's on Origin, it's $20. It's, well, at least the Steam version doesn't come with Secure ROM, which the retail version did, so if in fact Windows won't actually let it install itself, I mean the Secure ROM, it will stop it from running. So at least you can be assured that that malware isn't going to stick around your PC. Is it worth playing now? Well, the campaigns, they're nice. The music is great, it looks good, but there's no lasting appeal there. There's nothing making you want to go back into a skirmish match and just play one more time. Because the skirmish mode sucks, and the multiplayer, again, you're gonna have to set up a different server to actually be able to play it, and hopefully find some people willing to do so. You would probably find more lasting appeal in the Uprising standalone expansions challenge campaign. So, did it deserve the hate? I leave the answer to that question to you. Note that videos will be somewhat sparser in the coming months as the day job is grinning its ugly teeth at me and chomping at my legs. So, I'll see you again as soon as I can. Goodbye.